First Chronicles, chapters 25 through 27. David and the officers of the army also set apart some of the sons of Asaph, Heman, and Jeduthun, who were to prophesy, accompanied by lyres, harps, and cymbals. This is the list of the men who performed their service. From Asaph's sons, Zachar, Joseph, Nethaniah, and Azarellah, sons of Asaph, under Asaph's authority, who prophesied under the authority of the king. From Jeduthun's sons, Gedaliah, Zeri, Jeshiah, Shimei, Hashabiah, and Mattithiah, 6 under the authority of their father Jeduthun, prophesying to the accompaniment of lyres, giving thanks and praise to the Lord. From Heman's sons, Bukiah, Mattaniah, Uziel, Shebul, Jeremoth, Hananiah, Hanani, Eliatha, Gedalti, Ramamti-Ezer, Joshbekasha, Melothi, Hothir, and Mahazioth. All these sons of Heman, the king's seer, were given by the promises of God to exalt him, for God had given Heman 14 sons and 3 daughters. All these men were under their own father's authority for the music in the Lord's temple, with cymbals, harps, and lyres, for the service of God's temple. Asaph, Jeduthun, and Heman were under the king's authority. They numbered 288 together with their relatives, who were all trained and skillful in music for the Lord. They cast lots for their duties, young and old alike, teacher as well as pupil. The first lot for Asaph fell 12 to Joseph, his sons, and his relatives. 12. Gedaliah the second, 12. Him, his relatives, and his sons. The third to Zachar, his sons and his relatives, 12. The fourth to Isri, his sons and his relatives, 12. The fifth to Nethaniah, his sons and his relatives, 12. The sixth to Bukiah, his sons and his relatives, 12. The seventh to Jasarellah, his sons and his relatives, 12. The eighth to Jeshiah, his sons and his relatives, 12. The ninth to Mattaniah, his sons and his relatives, 12. The 10th to Shimei, his sons and his relatives, 12. The 11th to Azarel, his sons and his relatives, 12. The 12th to Hashabiah, his sons and his relatives, 12. The 13th to Shubael, his sons and his relatives, 12. The 14th to Mattithiah, his sons and his relatives, 12. The 15th to Jeremoth, his sons and his relatives, 12. The 16th to Hananiah, his sons and his relatives, 12. The 17th to Joshbekasha, his sons and his relatives, 12. The 18th to Hanani, his sons and his relatives, 12. The 19th to Malothi, his sons and his relatives, 12. The 20th to Eliatha, his sons and his relatives, 12. The 21st to Hothir, his sons and his relatives, 12. The 22nd to Gedalti, his sons and his relatives, 12. The 23rd to Mahathioth, his sons and his relatives, 12. The 24th to Romamti-Ezer, his sons and his relatives, 12. The following were the divisions of the gatekeepers. From the Kerites, Meshelemiah, son of Kor, one of the sons of Asaph, Meshelemiah, his sons, Zechariah the firstborn, Jediel the second, Zebediah the third, Jathniel the fourth, Elam the fifth, Jehohanan the sixth, and Elihoenai the seventh. Obededom also had sons, Shemaiah the firstborn, Jehozabad the second, Joah the third, Sekar the fourth, Nathaniel the fifth, Amiel the sixth, Issachar the seventh, and Peuthai the eighth. for God blessed him. Also to his son Shemaiah were born sons who ruled their ancestral families because they were strong, capable men. Shemai's sons, Othni, Raphael, Obed, and Elzabad. His relatives Eliu and Semachiah were also capable men. All of these were among the sons of Obed-Edom, with their sons and relatives. They were capable men with strength for the work, 62 from Obed-Edom. Meshelemiah also had sons and relatives who were capable men, 18. Hosa from the Merarites also had sons. Shimri the first, although he was not the firstborn, his father had appointed him as the first. Hilkiah the second, Tebaliah the third, and Zechariah the fourth. The sons and relatives of Hosa were 13 in all. These divisions of the gatekeepers, under their leading men, had duties for ministering in the Lord's temple, just as their relatives did. They cast lots for each temple gate according to their ancestral families, young and old alike. The lot for the east gate fell to Shelemiah. They also cast lots for his son Zechariah, an insightful counselor, and his lot came out for the north gate. Obed-Edom's was the south gate, and his son's lot was for the storehouses. It was the west gate and the gate of Shelesheth on the ascending highway for Suppim and Hosa. There were guards stationed at every watch. There were 6 Levites each day on the east, 4 each day on the north, 4 each day on the south, and 2 pair at the storehouses. As for the court on the west, there were 4 at the highway and 2 at the court. Those were the divisions of the gatekeepers from the descendants of the Korites and Merarites. From the Levites, Asia was in charge of the treasuries of God's temple and the treasuries of what had been dedicated. From him, the sons of Laden, who were the descendants of the Gershonites, through Laden, and were the family heads belonging to Laden, the Gershonite Jehieli. The sons of Jehieli, Zetham, and his brother Joel were in charge of the treasuries of the Lord's temple. From the Merarites, the Azharites, and the Hebronites, and the Uzzielites, Shebuel, a descendant of Moses' son Gershom, was the officer in charge of the treasuries. His relatives, through Eleazar, his son Rehabiah, his son Jeshiah, his son Joram, his son Zichri, and his son Shelomith. This Shelomith and his relatives were in charge of all the treasuries of what had been dedicated by King David, by the family heads who were the commanders of thousands and of hundreds, and by the army commanders. They dedicated part of the plunder from their battles for the repair of the Lord's temple. All that the seer Samuel, son of Kish, Abner, son of Ner, and Joab, son of Zeruiah, had dedicated, along with everything else that had been dedicated, were in the care of Shelomith and his relatives. From the Etherites, Shenaniah and his sons had duties outside the temple as officers and judges over Israel. From the Hebronites, Hashabiah and his relatives, 1,700 capable men, had assigned duties in Israel west of the Jordan for all the work of the Lord and for the service of the king. From the Heronites, Jerijah was the head of the Hebronites, according to the family records of his ancestors. A search was made in the 4th year of David's reign, and strong, capable men were found among them at Jazer in Gilead. There were among Jerijah's relatives 2,700 capable men who were family heads. King David appointed them over the Reubenites, the Gadites, and half the tribe of Manasseh as overseers in every matter relating to God and the king. This is the list of the Israelites, the family heads, the commanders of thousands and the commanders of hundreds, and their officers who served the king in every matter, to do with the divisions that were on rotated military duty each month throughout the year. There were 24,000 in each division. Jashobeam, son of Zabdiel, was in charge of the first division for the first month. 24,000 were in his division. He was a descendant of Perez and chief of all the army commanders of the first month. Dodai, the Ahoite, was in charge of the division for the second month, and Mikloth was the leader. 24,000 were in his division. The third army commander as chief for the third month was Benaiah, son of the priest Jehoiada. 24,000 were in his division. This Benaiah was a mighty man among the 30 and over the 30, and his son Amizabad was in charge of his division. The fourth commander for the fourth month was Joab's brother Asahel, and his son Zebediah was commander after him. 24,000 were in his division. The fifth for the fifth month was the commander Shamhuth, the Israelite. 24,000 were in his division. The sixth for the sixth month was Ira, son of Ikesh, the Tikwite. 24,000 were in his division. The seventh for the seventh month was Helez, the Pelonite. For the descendants of Ephraim, 24,000 were in his division. The eighth for the eighth month was Sebekai, the Hushathite, a Zerite. 24,000 were in his division. The ninth for the ninth month was Abiezer, the Anathothite, a Benjaminite. 24,000 were in his division. The 10th for the 10th month was Meharai, the Netophathite, a Zerahite. 24,000 were in his division. The 11th for the 11th month was Benaiah, the Parathonite, from the descendants of Ephraim. 24,000 were in his division. The 12th for the 12th month was Heldai, the Netophathite, of Othniel's family. 24,000 were in his division. The following were in charge of the tribes of Israel. For the Reubenites, Eleazar, son of Zikri, was the chief official. For the Simeonites, Shephatiah, son of Maacah. For the Levites, Hashabiah, son of Kemuel. For Aaron, Zadok. For Judah, Eliu, one of David's brothers. For Issachar, Omri, son of Michael. For Zebulun, Ishmaiah, son of Obadiah. For Naphtali, Jeremoth, son of Azriel. For the Ephraimites, Hoshea, son of Azaziah. For half the tribe of Manasseh, Joel, son of Pedaiah. For half the tribe of Manasseh in Gilead, Iddu, son of Zechariah. For Benjamin, Jaasiel, son of Abner. For Dan, Azarel, son of Jeroham. Those were the leaders of the tribes of Israel. David didn't count the men aged 20 or under, for the Lord had said he would make Israel as numerous as the stars of the sky. Joab, son of Zeruiah, began to count them, but he didn't complete it. There was wrath against Israel because of his census, and the number was not entered in the historical record of King David. Asmaveth, son of Adiel, was in charge of the king's storehouses. Jonathan, son of Uzziah, was in charge of the storehouses in the country of the cities, in the villages and in the fortresses. Ezri, son of Shelub, was in charge of those who worked in the fields, tilling the soil. Shimei, the Ramathite, was in charge of the vineyards. Zabdi, the Shifmite, was in charge of the produce of the vineyards for the wine cellars. Baal-Hanan, the Gederite, was in charge of the olive and sycamore trees in the Judean foothills. Joash was in charge of the stores of olive oil. Shitrai, the Sharonite, was in charge of the herds that grazed in Sharon, while Shaphat, son of Adlai, was in charge of the herds in the valleys. Obil, the Ishmaelite, was in charge of the camels. Jediah, the Meronothite, was in charge of the donkeys. Jaziz, the Hagrite, was in charge of the flocks. All these were officials in charge of King David's property. David's uncle, Jonathan, was a counselor. He was a man of understanding and a scribe. Jehiel, son of Hakmoni, attended the king's sons. Ahithophel was the king's counselor. Hushai, the Archite, was the king's friend. After Ahithophel came Jehoiada, son of Benaiah. Then Abiathar. Joab was the commander of the king's army.